Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show, comedy on Power Talk. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today, wherever you are in this world. And what an honor it is to bring in a couple of individuals who are trying to redefine consciousness. There was a period of time in our country when, in fact, psychedelics, LSD specifically, was not only legal, but it was used for a myriad of different conditions, including depression. And people in San Francisco could go to the League for Internal Freedom, and much like the cannabis clubs of today, go in and purchase tabs of Sandoz acid. And really, at the end of the day, what my show has become about is thinking for yourself and doing things for yourself. And at the end of the day, if you don't think for yourself, then you become a sheep. And I'm interested in creating shepherds. And I got a chance today to talk to two guys who are at the forefront of shepherding people into expanded consciousness and also being themselves. They hold what we call sanghas, or psychedelic communes, opportunities to guide people through multi-sensory experiences, and being able to get out of their own way, ego deaths, incredibly spiritual experiences, seeing God, and then also incorporating music and meditation within that. At the end of the day, people who walk out of these sanghas are healed, in a contemplative mood, or maybe even kind of burning inside, because that they were able to sort of look really inside the mirror and recognize that they have a lot of internal work to do. At the end of the day, it's important because, let's face it, we have become a much more square society, a much more fear-based society. And it's my belief that if a lot of square people actually were able to get microdosed, we'd actually be in a much more of a glide path towards one human race. That's what we are. We are one human race. Ethan Covey and Doc Kelley, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hello.
Thanks,
Hi.
Jake.
Nice
I love
to
that,
be here.
man.
You dig
Shepherds, not sheep.
Shepherds, not sheep, man. You guys are both shepherds. And it's great to talk to you guys. I wanted to ask you both, whoever wants to take the question first, what was the momentum that you guys had prior to coronavirus as it related to having these communal gatherings, sanghas, and how have you learned to adapt during this time?
Well, let me just say right up first off, as Doc Kelley, as somebody who's a part-time professor, I feel I should just make a slight correction there. So Sangha is a Sanskrit word that means spiritual community. So when we call ourselves Psychedelic Sangha, what it essentially means is a psychedelic spiritual community. So the community that we facilitate, that we hold space for, is called a Sangha. The events that we do have, the various programming that we facilitate and offer to people in our Sangha and the public. Each event has a different kind of, name. So we do, I think what you were thinking of, and what you described very well, were these sort of multi-sensory happenings that we were doing pre-COVID. So these are, happenings in the avant-garde that, we're sort of combining the original happenings that were being done by people like John Cage in the 60s, and also taking cues from the Merry Pranksters and the acid test, and sort of bringing together meditation, music, safe psychedelic experimentation. We don't provide substance, but we do provide everything else, including trained facilitators at these happenings. But we do a lot of other kinds of programs as well, besides happenings, including our integration circle, which is a totally sober event where we help people integrate the kinds of experiences that they would have at one of our happenings. So just a point of clarification around.
No, I appreciate
Sangha.
that. No, I just, how have you adapted during coronavirus?
Well, Eve, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'd love to. This is Ethan Covey.
What's up, man?
Obviously, like everybody, we have needed to change in very profound ways because of the pandemic, and so much of the community that we've been building, primarily in New York over the last couple of years, has been based around in-person, face-to-face interactions, and whether that is at something like one of the happenings that Doc was mentioning, where, it's this thing that in our current reality seems so distant, this concept of actually wanting to be and enjoying being in a situation where you're, there's 60 people in a garage-sized space seeing music and dancing and
Exactly.
and having conversations and so on. Unfortunately, we're a year into this pandemic, and the idea of doing something like that again still feels like it's likely a long ways away. And that obviously being one example, but as Doc mentioned too, through all the different kinds of activities and programming that we do, really all of it's based around getting together people who are interested in consciousness expansion and interested in spiritual exploration, and having conversations, meeting like-minded souls and talking and working together, and we've needed to change that completely, So we, like many people, I think last spring particularly, we just took some time off, not really as an organization, but instead of trying to just sort of, find some pale imitation of what we were doing on Zoom, like is happening with a lot of other things, we decided to just kind of give things a break for a little bit of a while. And we did a few things now and then, but for the most part, we just kind of took a breather and tried to focus our attentions on, on doing what we needed to do to support ourselves and our families and so on during the pandemic. But it's also caused us to be creative in really new and different ways, particularly as the pandemic has just dragged on. And one of those has been, it's sort of the pandemic birthed a really, really cool project for us, which is this Sounds from the Bardo series. That we, I know you've noticed these, and we've had some really cool support and feedback so far from it. And it's a series of kind of do-it-yourself sound bath meditations that we've been releasing as albums on Bandcamp, exclusively on Bandcamp. And those actually, that idea kind of was birthed out of things that we did and will do again at some point at our happenings, where we would always weave into the evening and into kind of the narrative arc of the evening. Our happenings were in many ways our way of trying to reinvent rock and roll shows, and do it in a more participatory, interesting way compared to the kind of, opener.
Yeah, the formula trip.
Break,
yeah, no, I dig.
Headliner, formula thing. So, one of the things that we would do is in the course of these very long kind of, full throttle events that we would do, we would weave in portions, what we would call our Bardo sessions, that would be, usually they would feature a little bit more ambient music, and the hope was that people who were participating at the events would take a moment and maybe even sit on the floor and meditate, or have soft conversations and so on. And we weave those into the course of the evening. And a while ago, actually, we sort of realized that those in and of themselves could be their own events, and so we started doing a series of them called Bardo Bath that we were hosting initially at this very cool little location in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, called Hi-Fi Loft, that is run by a friend of ours, Jared, and it's actually a showroom for a really high-end audio video company, and so there's really nice speakers and everything, and turntables and stuff in the space, and it has a great vibe. And we gather some musicians and some friends and do sound baths. And afterwards, we'd hang out and listen to some records and connect and so on. And one of the things that we realized during the pandemic is that, God, if there's ever been a time where we all need a little bit of a break, it's now. And people are being very challenged to try to find that break and find some peace in various ways during all the stress and horror of what this last year has been. And so we wanted to create versions of those sound baths that people could do at home, kind of engage with a choose your own adventure sort of thing. So that's what we've done with that series, where, people have audio tracks that they can stream or download that have a little bit of guided meditation, both at the beginning and at the end, just to kind of set the scene. And then about an hour's worth of, real deep musical journeys. And we also work with video artists to include a full-length video piece. So if people want some sort of eye candy stimulation as well, they can watch along. And really, it's great. You can do it at home with an eye mask on, in the same way that you'd approach a traditional sound bath, or you can kind of listen to it while out for a hike, or many different ways of engaging to sort of bring that sense of peace and a little at least internal journey for all of us in a time when we're not able to journey as much externally as we normally are.
I mean, Doc, I wanted to ask you, for me, there's a couple things. Can you talk a little bit about the idea of people being potentially abhorred by the fact that you're doing something in a holy sanctuary like a church, or a synagogue, or a mosque in this case? Right. Some people would say it's a pure place. The idea that
right.
You have a priest where information is supposedly coming through them, and they are the conduit for information, and then they're passing it on to the parishioners, again turning them into sheep. If you were talking to a bunch of skeptics, so to speak, about why you would choose a forum like that to do what this album was all about with Metzger and Leone and Hill, how would you explain to them the history of spiritual reckoning using psychedelics in places of spiritual of holiness? I mean, it goes back a long time.
Yeah. It does, and there are different ways to answer that question, and one way might be to go back to ancient India and look at a culture where we know psychedelics were used. Soma is a psychedelic, and soma is a Sanskrit word, and it's been used for referring to various substances over hundreds of years, but most scholars, I think, will agree that at one point in time, it corresponded to a psychedelic, probably, a psychedelic mushroom, definitely a plant-based one, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, when we talk about drugs being abhorrent in a religious context, that's a very Western view that's not shared by other cultures. For example, this culture in ancient India, right? But then, you could flip over to the American tradition of spirituality, and we trace our lineage back to, people like Richard Alpert, a.k.a. Ram Dass,
Mm-hmm.
Timothy Leary, Ralph Metzner, people who were experimenting with meditation and psychedelics in relatively safe environments. One of the ways in which we differentiate ourselves from our lineage is that we've tried to make those spaces more accessible and safer for people. So the idea of doing what we're doing, in this case, Sounds from the Bardo, in a church, I think is actually quite in keeping with these two lineages. The church that we're working with is also an unusual church. It's Judson Memorial Church. It's smack dab in the middle of the West Village, right on Washington Square Park. They've always been a big supporter of weirdness in New York. The gay and lesbian communities have always done a lot of things there. They were doing raves before COVID hit, and it's a functioning church. It's a real church. It's not like they're just renting out to the highest renter or something.
Absolutely.
They really are very aware of who they're renting to, and they've been very good to us, because I think they see that what we offer is not just a Sounds from the Bardo experience, but also the integration circle, because that's the other thing that we do at Judson. So that was our original program that we started at Judson with, is this integration circle that we do once a month that is free. And then it was only during COVID, when their programming in the main sanctuary hall, completely shut down for obvious reasons, that we even had the opportunity to get in there, because it's kind of above our rent. Like we had sort of, our regular venue is a adorable but very low rent kind of situation out in Greenpoint. It kind of looks very underground, which is what we love. We love that.
Of course.
Ethan was talking about, like, one of our objectives being to reinvent the rock and roll experience, and part of that was to get rid of a stage and have people sort of on level with the participants, with the performers, much the same way that the acid tests were,
Absolutely.
there's this blurring between, who's the artist, who's the audience, and everybody's kind of equally involved. So I guess just to finish out your question there, I think we have these very culturally driven notions of the sacred and the profane, and we are operating on our own kind of reckoning of what's sacred and what's profane, and I think people like Judson get us, and obviously the people in our Sangha are all of that mindset.
We have a game on this program called Name That Voice. It's such a high honor to talk to both you cats. I'm going to put this in for you right now, and we'll come back and break it down.
The research we did as part of the Beckley Imperial Research Program, looking with brain imaging at what is happening in the brain when you get a kind of peak experience. And basically, the kind of repressive network in the brain, which is called the default mode network, and which censors which is consciousness and what is repressed, has its blood supply diminished during a psychedelic experience. So the inhibitory and repressive function is lifted, and then the whole brain begins to communicate with itself. So the segregation of the different networks and parts of the brain is broken down. So all the different parts start communicating with each other. It's rather like when the cat is away, the mice will play.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just beautiful how the whole brain was lit up with connectivity, as opposed to little parts of the brain being lit up. And I think that is typical of the mystical experience. It's the kind of daily controlling network of kind of tunnel vision, and doing what is ordinarily done drops away, and the brain becomes more like entropic, more chaotic, more like an infant's brain, where many more perceptions come in simultaneously, and consciousness is fed from many different areas of the brain, whether it's emotion or visual or auditory, and so it kind of increases synesthesia, and also I would say probably the likelihood is that it increases telepathy and those sensations which are normally kept repressed.
Let me ask you, either of you want to take a guess at who that is?
I know who it is. Do you know who it is?
Yeah, I know. I think so. Is that Amanda Fielding?
But both of you were so on the that was my interview with Amanda from a couple years ago, and it's funny because I did an interview with John Perry Barlow, rest in peace, in 2015, and he was talking about the April experiment when they gave half the group a placebo cocktail at the church at Boston University, and then the other half the God drug, and then after the interview was so cosmic, and he talked about going to Wesleyan and they had the Curry concerts. This whole thing was so mind blowing that I was like, hey, we really need. This was in 2015. I was like, I want to keep pushing the envelope on making psychedelics much more of a sort of a mainstream thing. And he goes, well, the first person you want to talk to is Amanda Fielding. And I wasn't really hip to her. Mm-hmm. And then she just blew me open with she was steeped in this stuff more than I even knew. And I guess I ask either one of you, obviously I'd want to, I agree with everything she said. Can you have people within the construct of the gatherings when you were able to have the gatherings, can you talk about the way that they reported about synesthesia? I think that's one of the most amazing multisensory mixing things that goes on with psychedelics, along with basically becoming almost born again, almost childlike. Logic goes out the window. You're in the spirit mind. And I just wonder if you in your sanghas in Greenpoint or in the church, had the kind of feedback that you've gotten from people that maybe came in not necessarily expecting a lot, and it was a mind-altering experience.
Well, I think, I can take a stab at that first, at least. I think that one of the things that's really interesting about it is that, mind-altering can mean so many different things. And, of course, one of the realities of the events we do is, as Doc mentioned earlier, we are most certainly not providing substance to anyone who comes to our events. And we really, the whole point with any of the events that we do, things like the happenings where they're meant to kind of mimic and be a home for a psychedelic experience, is that in many ways they're meant to be just as psychedelic, whether a person's sober, as if someone chooses to take a substance and come to the event. And so we make it safe for everyone, but we don't know. We don't really know how many people are choosing to turn on who come to one of those events. And for us, really, the key is just making sure that no matter who you are, no matter how you come, and no matter how you choose to be a part of something that we're doing, you feel welcome, you feel safe, and you feel like, you're among a group of people who is protecting you and promoting your behavior. So, that said, we do very regularly hear from people who have just been overjoyed with the experiences that they've had at our events. And, sometimes that is something like after going through a whole evening at one of the happenings and then all kind of the ups and downs of the various narrative arc of that event. Sometimes it's people who just really, during COVID, for instance, when we were able to start having some of our Bardo baths again at Judson, just hearing from people who, it was the first time in 7 or 8 months, really since last March, that they'd been able to see any sort of live music, so just the experience of being in a room, hearing a couple people perform, that in and of itself is such a heavy experience for people that, that's really the key, is we want everything we do to be transforming for the people who are there and who are a part of it, whatever that ends up being meaning for their particular means of engagement.
Doc, do you guys believe that, I guess, in my mind, after this is my second decade now behind the microphone, and, I feel like I'm sort of just beginning on my path, but at the same time, I sort of define success is singularity, uniqueness, having your own individual voice, and then doing something completely different than anybody else that is necessarily a broadcaster. And I wonder about you guys in terms of, do you guys believe that you are working off a template, or is this something singular and unique in this country and possibly the world? I mean, obviously people do sanghas, but I like the fact that, obviously, like Gravy told me, he still gets harassed because, people blame him at the Watts acid tests for having the Kool-Aid, the non-LSD Kool-Aid, and then the LSD Kool-Aid.
Yeah, too close to it.
And 50 people got admitted because, whatever, they were sweating and drinking, and they were thirsty after dancing, and they got dosed. But the point is that, I like how, you're basically come for the experience, and if you want a dose or whatever on your own, that's cool. If you don't, that's cool too, because we're just here to, I don't even know what the right word is. You're creating a space, a sacred space. So, were you influenced by, did you guys just sort of, is this a unique experience within Americana at this time? Pre-coronavirus?
I have an answer I can.
Yeah, just
share.
go ahead.
I think, the template for what we're doing is the psychedelic experience, and I think people like in ancient India knew that, and they were doing happenings, and they called them Gana chakras. They were these multi-sensory events where friends would get together, do a psychedelic, and do a meditation practice, and explode their senses, and through the meditation disassociate with those sensory experiences and have a kind of, different relationship to them, a more, what we might frame as a spiritual relationship rather than just a hedonic one,
Yes.
Fast forward, to the counterculture in America, and again, you have people like, the merry pranksters and the acid tests capitalizing or maybe discovering again that template, that sort of special recipe, which includes bringing, music and people together. And, really, I think what was so magical about that experimentation was they discovered that music could function as a guide through all the different phases of the psychedelic experience, right? So, therapists know this now. When you go, to Johns Hopkins and you're a subject in a psychedelic experiment, the playlist is a huge part of the experience, depending on what kind of experiment they're running. But music is central to the outcome in these experiments. And so in that sense, the template's been around for a while. The Grateful Dead or the Dead and Company are still rolling with it. It's the long show with space in the middle. It's an arc that you might even describe in terms that Joseph Campbell used, the hero's journey, where you disembark from the ordinary world and you go into this extraordinary world, and that's the space, and then you come out the other end a transformed and different person who might need a little integration. So that basic template is perennial. I think what we're doing differently is, like you said, we're not providing substance, and more importantly, we're highlighting the importance of psychedelic, or our definition of psychedelic being not substance driven. What it is it's an altered state, right? And you can get to that. altered state through a variety of different of methodologies. And meditation's one, yoga is one, different drugs, different dosages, talking, music, all these things contribute to the altered state. And what they all share, and I think you'll like this, is this idea of the individual exercising their cognitive liberty.
Thank you.
To
Yes.
alter, their own consciousness however way they see fit. And that's what we're holding space for, and it's a very non-judgmental space. And that's, I think, one of the flaws that, we as a culture, often fall into, where we think we're being progressive and liberal, but sometimes, in the psychedelic world, it can be off-putting, it can be elitist, it can be, too dominated by men. So, what we're doing differently is trying to make that space more diverse, more approachable, and not dependent on substance, but at the same time, completely welcoming that too.
This is fascinating stuff. I mean, I think
the one thing also.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Jake. I was just going to add really quickly too that I think one other thing that is key to the idea of how we engage with those templates is that we also a key element of the song is that we have a very deep contrarian streak that we like to rely on. So we, as much as we love and pay homage to these historical milestones and markers along the pathway that we very much are on, we also like messing with them, and so we really enjoy trying to find ways to challenge ourselves, to challenge the artists that we work with, and to challenge the people who come to the events that we put on, and so one example of that is something like the sound baths. I mean, Doc and I are both huge fans of a very traditional sort of sound bath approach where it's in a yoga or meditation studio with a mat on the floor and an eye shade and singing bowls and so on.
Absolutely, yeah.
Those are beautiful events, and we love participating in those and know many people who do them. But we like the idea of trying to inject something a little bit different into it. So one of the things that we do, and I think you really recognize it both in the Sounds from the Bardo albums that we put out, the first one with Will Soul, who records as Chronocrafter, and then the second one, as you mentioned, with Tony and Jeff and Scott, is we like engaging people who don't typically play in those sorts of spaces, and they may be making deeply psychedelic and very wonderfully vibrant music, but when they play, they're not generally playing gigs in meditation studios, it's a little bit of a rock and roll energy that we're throwing in there.
Wow.
And part of that, it's reinforced in the journey too. We were speaking with someone recently who was commenting on, for our first Sounds of the Bardo, the Chronocrafter album, how dark it gets at times and how challenging it gets at times. And that's exactly the point. It's not all meant to be just sort of, wind chimes and woodwinds,
Absolutely.
We really enjoy throwing people off balance a little bit.
Can you give an example?
Extremely reflective of an example of what exactly?
Of throwing somebody, of being contrarian, of throwing people off balance, keeping them off balance.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think, a lot of it is with the music so that people, you don't exactly know what you're going to expect. When we do the happenings, I mean, one great example is a way that we have begun some of our happenings where we did a great one where this was, I think, 2 happenings ago, where Doc recited the Heart Sutra, which Allen Ginsberg used to recite the beginning of a lot of happenings and so on, and similar events that took place in the 60s. And right when it kind of reaches its grand crescendo, I was standing in the corner with wearing a mask, this crazy mask, and I smashed a violin, and that's actually an old Fluxus art piece.
Wow.
there was a violin solo that was done where basically, you know, I was sort of setting up and tuning the instrument and so on, and there was a music stand and everything, but then instead of actually playing the instrument, when it reached the moment where, you know, where it reached the time, I smashed it and it flew across the audience, you know, and that was then also the signal where basically as soon as that happened, the band kicked in and the event, you know, we were off and running.
Commenced.
And
Wow.
It was cool. And it was a really cool way of doing something very different. We did a different one where we smashed a Buddha, and Doc actually got rather bloody, which was pretty wild. So,
wait,
you know,
you smashed a Buddha? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, have you ever
And that's
heard
a way
that
of really
saying,
toying
if
with
you
these
see the
things.
Buddha?
No, I mean,
Kill your idols, right?
well, I think it's so important to, I guess, you know, I mean, if I went and was somewhat in an altered state coming in, I mean, I wouldn't want to be needy or codependent, but how available are you guys for introspection? I mean, you must be getting pulled in many different ways. I'd like to believe that if I was in a psychedelic haze that I could focus in on the music or, you know, sort of figure out a way in some sort of yogic way to, you know, to dance or to alleviate. But if someone gets into a headspace or they go into a bad trip, I mean, is Doc and Ethan available for introspection, or are you guys just too busy? I mean, that's kind of one of the things that I'm...
No, it's a great question. Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's a great question, and we are available. And even, you know, we always, at all of our happenings, we always have at least one, often two people who are dedicated psychedelic rangers. And these one guy is a Buddhist chaplain.
Wow.
And another guy is trained, I think, as a paramedic. And they both are psychedelic people with, you know, first-person experiences to draw on, and they're there to only do to perform that function. And so, you know, Ethan and I are also facilitators in that environment, but because we're the event planners, we're also, you know, our attention is also needs to be on
of course.
Other things. But I've sat with a couple of people during happenings and you know, tried to help them through a bad trip. You know, we've designed them, like I said, onto the I think arc of the psychedelic experience. So, you know, when we were doing our Bardo sessions, like that was a good opportunity for introspection. You know, so in other words, like, you know, it's not always if you're on a psychedelic, introspection is not always compatible with where you're at in that arc, right? Like you may be just tripping too hard to focus, and you shouldn't try. You should just be following what feels right, and maybe that's dancing, maybe that's being ecstatic, maybe that's talking a lot to somebody, maybe it's just being in the corner, whatever. But those Bardo sessions also had the function of grounding people, giving them the opportunity to sit, because I think both Ethan and I have been to shows where we've wanted to do that, you know, and it's hard because that's not the culture we come from, and there's no, you know, there's no place to do that comfortably in a conventional venue.
You know, Ethan, can you talk about, like, in your mind, how psychedelics have... There's two words I want to talk about, because one thing that, you know, I just... Obviously, we're all sort of in PTSD after the last 4 years of in the political realm and whatnot, and then on the other side, sort of what I forget who was talking about, the idea of progressivism, and it's kind of a turnoff sometimes. It's a little elitist, or I don't know what it's a little bit too PC, and these two words that come to my mind are shame and guilt, and then obviously, you know, a lot of people just love to have a psychedelic experience to have, you know, what you might call like an ego death or something, and I wonder if you can talk about a formative experience on psychedelics for you. Maybe there was a lot consternation, but ultimately you found the other side, and it made you who you are today, and it made you a credible co-founder of the Psychedelic Sangha.
Yeah, certainly. I think that's a really terrific question, and in many ways gets to the depth of complexity that surrounds psychedelics, and not only how to best engage with them and what experiences you can get out of them, but also just the work that needs to be done to make sure that you're doing that in a as sort of beneficial and healthy of a way as possible. I know for me, for instance, one of the things that's really been huge was getting a sense of the true importance and really, as far as we're concerned, the necessity of integration work. So meaning doing work, sometimes both before and after you have psychedelic experiences that really helps you put, categorize and understand and work your way through what those experiences are. Very personally, I actually, when I was, it was ages ago, but when I think it was either my freshman or sophomore year of college, I had a very, very intense psilocybin trip that, at the time I kind of thought of myself as, I think as many of us do at that age, I sort of thought that I was, worldly and
indestructible,
much, indestructible, and I got my ass kicked very, very soundly, and it's I sort of joke about it now, but the reality of it was that it was an experience that I was in no way prepared for, and it was an experience that actually affected me for years in different ways. And a lot of it was just that I even as I had continued psychedelic experience after that, I was never really able to appropriately, I was going to say understand. Understand is it's a difficult word, because I don't know if you ever truly understand psychedelic experiences, and I don't know if that's actually what the goal should be. But I struggled to really understand a lot of what I'd seen during that experience, and it took me quite a long time to actually realize that one of the reasons why that was the case was that I wasn't appropriately integrating. I hadn't even, by the time I got to appropriately integrating that particular experience, it might have even been 10 years after it had happened. And so that whole role of integration, that's something that Doc mentioned before is a huge component of what we do, and it's a huge reason why we offer that for free. It's really we see it as a public health service that we do, educating. If anyone's going to be engaging with psychedelics, then, and if we are in any way doing something that may, invite people to do that, to turn on, then we really feel like we're doing a disservice if we're also not providing as much education and harm reduction as we possibly can. And so the series of integration circles that we do, both in person in New York and at Judson Church, and also we have a series online that we do now too, that's really based on that whole idea that to us, the work that you're doing, it never really ends. Quite regularly in those meetings, we'll hear from people who are recounting recent psychedelic experiences that they had and saying, I don't know, it's been a couple weeks and I'm not really feeling a huge change, or I don't quite know what I got out of it or whatever. And I think one of the messages we really try to get across in that is that if you're talking about a few days or a few weeks or whatever, your timeline's way off. This is work that if you're engaging with it, you really should be committed to working at it, for potentially even for years. There's always things that you can learn. I still constantly am learning things from experiences that I had many, many years ago, that are just shown to me in new ways as we go out through the process of living and gathering experiences.
That's really, where did you guys come from, man? Go ahead, Doc. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I wanted to add that, what we do also in those, a big part of how integration works in the circles that we facilitate is peer-to-peer support. And that's a theme throughout everything we do. We talked about it in the context of happenings and the sort of breakdown between performer and audience. That notion that everybody's on an equal playing field is really important, I think, and necessary to where we're at right now in terms of psychedelics. Like the traditional model has been, if you want to have a psychedelic experience and you don't know what you're doing, in other words, you don't know how to procure the substance, and you need a guide or something, like you would seek out a quote unquote shaman, pay top dollar,
right,
and they would perform they would be your guide, and you would be essentially in their care. And that's the traditional sort of model. And it's a good one, but there are also some problems with it. And one of those problems is you might get a bad shaman, and that's becoming, unfortunately, more of a phenomenon with the popularity of psychedelics. The other problem with that model is that it's not empowering to the individual. The individual is very much is at the mercy of the shaman. You're not learning how to do it on your own. If you are, it's only really by virtue of being in that context. You're not actually being taught to do it yourself. So, when people come to our integration circles, it's peer-to-peer support. And you had mentioned like shame before, and a lot of what people are overcoming is shame in that context. Shame
right,
of the war on drugs conditioned into all of us, And that's something that's really easy to fix on a peer-to-peer level. Like, you don't need to be a shrink just to hear somebody talk, and you don't need to be a shrink to listen and give somebody the validation they need just to be heard. And that's huge when it comes to these kinds of experiences. And so, I guess what I'm saying is that there's this peer-to-peer element pervades everything we do. And that's also, I think, different from other sanghas. We are not a spiritual organization that's oriented around a guru. We're not oriented around a teacher. We like to, when we do events where there is a teacher, it's not that we're against that, but we just are not, the glue that binds us is not the charisma of a guru or a shaman. It's ourselves and the community that we create as individuals.
Well, I mean, I've interviewed a lot of healers in different capacities, and again, this is, what you're doing is not, these ayahuasca trips, but you find a lot of the people that go on these things, they wind up, sometimes the heads of them are pretty dubious in their intentions. So I love where you guys are very heart-centered people. Doc, both of you can talk about this, but you got a doctorate in religion from Columbia, and I opened the show with a little monologue about creating shepherds and not sheep, and I think I'm curious to get your opinion or just your evolution of your own perspective on religion, because my dad was Jewish, my mom was Catholic, and I was pretty much raised agnostic. And, so many people go in monotheistic religion, they go and worship at a place and they take directives from a priest or somebody who supposedly is a conduit for information coming through them from the divine. And I would argue that that we all are conduits to the divine, that we all have God within us, and that when we get out of our own way and our true nature takes over, that we have the ability to be that conduit, to be that bridge, to be that. And I feel like in our society especially, it gets missed all the time. And because what happens is when you recognize that you are a conduit and you're not fully responsible for anything that you're doing, that you recognize how you become humbled by it, and you also begin to learn to think for yourself. So I guess my feeling is, since you got a doctorate in religion, how has your concept of source God changed, if at all?
I mean, for me, I've always had a spiritual orientation, which has led me to believe that maybe there's kind of like some genetic, gene for like spirituality or something.
Right.
But I've also been a skeptic, so it's a weird kind of spirituality. It's a very American, I think, spirituality. It's kind of a very, I connect my religion back to people like William James. People who were spiritual but were experimenting with their spirituality. They were pragmatists. They were spiritual pragmatists who, were spiritual, but their beliefs were based on first-person experience.
Exactly.
They were, people, or their religion was a religion based on experiences, and experiences that were working for them. So my notion of religion has always been the same. If it's working for you, do it. But if you're not having experiences, then what's the point, right? Like, then it just becomes dogma. Then it just becomes another social institution that has the same, problems as other human projects. I mean, for me, in other words, like, religion is very pragmatic. If you're not achieving mystical experiences, if you're not achieving a sense of connection with the divine, then it's not working. You shouldn't be holding out. You certainly shouldn't be, putting all your eggs in a basket, waiting for the day when a guru is going to make it happen for you, or whatever. Like, I'm very much of the mind that, we may lean on teachers for guidance, but you've got to do it yourself, and if you're not doing it yourself, then you need to reevaluate. But that's just my
I mean, I think
it's everybody has a different.
I mean, I think it's beautiful. Ethan, do you believe that? I think, just dovetailing on what Doc was saying, the idea that firsthand experience, you have teachers for wisdom and rely on them for support, but ultimately, think for yourself. For me, I mean, I'm 42, and I have found my purpose in life. And there's so many people that go through life, and they can be agnostic or not, but they never know what their purpose is in life. They never discover that. And I think, and they could have all the material stuff in the world, and they could have all the toys in the world and all the houses, and they're miserable, or they're soulless, or they're directionless. And I just wonder if you believe you found your purpose in life through these happenings, and through all the different experiences that you guys have had and will continue to have.
Oh man, that's a heavy question. I don't know if we're ever meant to find our purpose in life. I think in some ways our purpose in life is to continually be searching for different little pieces of the answer. I'm not a huge believer that at a certain point things crack open and you have all that knowledge, or you ever get to that point where things are perfect. I don't know if that's what exists.
Yeah, I don't know about perfect. I mean, I'm just saying, like, what spirit have you found? What spirit has this helped you? Has this fed you spiritually to help you find your true nature? I agree. It's the forever journey.
Yeah, of course, and it absolutely has. I mean, I think that Doc and I really got this Sangha rolling because when we first met, a lot of it was just one of those all too rare times in your life where within just a few minutes of knowing someone, you can recognize the fact that you're brethren, and you're meant to be connected, best friends. You're meant to do something together. And I think we had that experience when we very first started. We really just sat down. We met once, and then we met again at the new school over a cup of coffee. And within a couple of minutes, we were just basically sort of throwing some ideas out, and we realized that we were talking about doing things that were extremely similar. And I think we both were incredibly fired up and remain incredibly fired up to have that connection, And I think that definitely in building that community, it's been huge. It's been huge to see all of the other people that we've been able to connect with who are hungry for those same things. And, you know, the sense of joy and the sense of, you know, spiritual and artistic release that we get out of being able to organize these events and the various projects we work on is you know, I think it can't be overstated for either one of us. And in general, just, you know, as an artist, I think that as an artist who lives in New York, you know, one of the things that I've long struggled with is that you're in this city of millions and millions of people, and it's extremely easy to meet people, or can be easy to meet people, but it can be very difficult to build truly meaningful, closely knit communities.
Yeah.
And yeah, big time. And I think really, I mean, I use New York as an example because that's where I've spent most of my adult life, but really I think that happens in our world no matter where you are. And I think as we've all seen with the rise of social media and online interactions and so on, it can be extremely lonely in a world where you're surrounded by more information and more people than ever before. And so building these communities where you can actually meet with people, reinforce people, sit down with folks and say, like, hey, what do you really want to do, you know, and kind of brainstorm and come up with ideas and then just do our best to see what we can make happen, you know. And that has been, it's really, I can't find the words to describe.
It's okay.
How
No, I mean, it was
meaningful and important that's been to my life.
Doc, we have to do part 2 because we're really just getting going here. But Doc, you know, Doc, can you talk about, you know, because I've done thousands of interviews with musicians, my elders, our peers, et cetera, and there was a time in our country's history when, you know, especially in the music of improvisational music, there were no schools for it. You know, there maybe were 2 jazz schools in the country, North Texas and Berkeley at one time. And jazz was a street scholar. You know, that was the academy. You didn't learn in the academy. And what happens now is that a lot of cats go into the academy and they wind up coming out sounding like their teacher. And there's a lot of interesting things that relate to that, the homogenization of sound, the saturation of visual material. But the point is that a lot of the music that I get off on from a certain period in our country's history, it's been somewhat stagnated to a degree because cats are not learning on the bandstand, they're learning in the academy. And I wonder, you know, how you have integrated at the new school and how much freedom you get within the academics to be able to not just create your own curriculum, but essentially, I guess the best way to say it is, you know, you never have the same Sangha the same way once. You know, you never do it the same way. It always is different. I wonder how much flexibility you have within the academy to, I don't know, bridge these gaps that often need to be done in commune in a very free-form avant-garde setting.
I mean, the new school is a weird place by definition. Like, it's always been, it's always prided itself on being a bastion of liberal arts. So I've actually taught classes at the new school on, I should say, not on psychedelics, but, you know, topically on psychedelics.
Because you can't really get right. You have to like weave around it, right? You can't go dive, right? You have to sort of finagle it so that it's appropriate for the administration to sign off on, right? I mean, it has to be something on the periphery.
Well, that's my point. Is that initially, yes. I mean, for when I was in graduate school and just after graduate school, it would never have occurred to me that I would be, you know, that it would be socially, professionally acceptable to teach a course on psychedelics. But, you know, what changed during the psychedelic renaissance was social norms were completely affected by the reopening of research. And you know, I remember the moment when Michael Pollan did his New Yorker piece, because for me as a professor, it was like, I can put this on the syllabus. Like, this means we can start studying psychedelics in class. Like, if there's research, then it's academic, and we can do this
exactly.
now. So that was my cue to like start teaching it in the classroom. And the moment I did, my students were like, "You've done psychedelics," and because it's just written all over my face. Like, you can tell, like, somebody who's had first-person experience, when they're talking about something.
Absolutely.
And then I found myself in this, I probably should have seen it coming, but I found myself in this position of talking about my own experiences because students were asking and they wanted to know. And I'm the kind of teacher that likes to level with my students. So, I was quite nervous about that. And I had that whole experience of coming out of the psychedelic closet and kind of deciding to own what I had always hidden and always been ashamed of and felt like might threaten my employment. That moment actually was sort of pushed because a woman interviewed me for the Village Voice, and I'd never been interviewed on this before. I don't even think I'd ever been interviewed before, and I was so ecstatic, and like I just said all this stuff. We had like a 2-hour interview, and then that night I was like, oh my God, like I've given this woman all this information about my drug use, and she's going to put that in print, and I'm going to lose my job. And that was really that's what I mean by that. It sort of pushed me out of the closet because I had to make that decision. Am I going to own this? Am I going to walk proud with my psychedelics, or am I going to try to like backpedal and like, keep my employment and look like a square or square enough to like be employable? And so that was a big moment for me. And since then it's only, the social norms have only, become more and more, accepting of psychedelics. And I even got to teach a course with my friend Catherine McLean, who was a psychedelic researcher at Johns Hopkins. So she kind of brought the science and I brought the cultural history, and we did a whole course on the cultural and scientific history of psychedelics at the New School. It was fantastic.
Wow. I mean, Ethan,
but I'm also not a full-time professor.
Well, but I mean, it's we're gonna can we do part 2 like pretty soon? Like I really would love. I just feel like you guys are some of the hippest cats around, and people need to. You guys are very good at articulating a lot of this esoteric stuff. Ethan,
we'd love to do it, man. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. I mean, I wanted to ask you just. Where do you guys feel? I mean, again, we're in an altered state of consciousness all the time now because of coronavirus. But like, assuming we can gain some clarity in the coming months, where do you guys feel like you want to grow the most in as an organization, and just like, where do you know you need to push yourselves out of your comfort zone? Obviously, you guys have been doing it for quite some time. You're always, like you said, it's firsthand experience. It's practical application. So many people think they're going to wait to be hit by some spark of lightning in order to get some momentum in their life. But actually, you have to do it yourself. But I just wonder about, for you guys, where do you feel like you need to grow the most as an organization?
That's a great question, and I think there are a number of different answers to it. We obviously are really, really excited and hungry to be able to resume some of the activities that we haven't been able to do during pandemic times, and it's extremely exciting just to think about finally being able to do that again at some point, hopefully within the next few months, whenever things feel right. But I think it is a good point. One of the things that Doc and I spend a lot of time talking about is making sure that we're never really repeating ourselves. And that happens in a lot of different ways, or we're inspired in a lot of different ways to address that question. I think some things definitely for our group is, we really want to continue to build this Sangha, and we know that there are more interested zoned people out there who kind of, no matter what their background or history is, would really dig what we're doing, and we want to be able to engage with them. We really want to work to be more diverse and have a more diverse community of people. And we want to, expand beyond New York City. A lot of the stuff that we're doing, particularly the things that take place in person, we're in New York, so most of that's happening here. One thing that has been actually kind of nice about pandemic times has been that we have done a little bit more online, and that's allowed us to engage with a number of people who don't just live in the New York City area or aren't just passing through. And then I think, regarding the specific events, we really like having some tricks up our sleeve, and so even with something like a happening, when we get back to a point of doing it again, we want it to really feel like both coming home, and both for us and for the people who have really been our most, dedicated supporters, many of whom have come to really all those events that we've thrown. But we also are already working on some things that will surprise people. We want to make sure that everybody is getting something fresh when they come back from this break.
Well, like Phil Lesh said, he said, we never play the same song the same way once. You guys never have the same song go the same way once. It's different I think that's the magic of it, is that it feels like home, but yet it's different every time. And that is hard to do. That takes a lot of improvisation.
We don't even believe in learning a song,
Well, listen, you guys made my day. I will definitely, let's pick it up real soon. We got a lot more to do, and I love where you guys are at, and I love what you're doing, and I look forward to taking part in it when the time is right.
Thanks so
great,
much.
Jake. Thanks so much, man. We really appreciate it.
Yeah,
we're fans of your show. We've corresponded a little bit and tried to do this before, and we're just so happy to finally be on it. Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, it was the highest honor. Bless you both. Talk to you soon.
You too, man. Thank you.
Peace. Later.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. That was a great hang. Thanks to Kevin Calabro for setting that up. Doc Kelley, Ethan Covey, the Psych Sangha headquarters in New York City. A lot more to get to. We'll be back with Richard Gowan after this.